This video is on the manifest and latent functions of prostitution. And when we look at the manifest and latent functions, we're going to find out that prostitution serves many purposes and meets many needs in society that go beyond the obvious. Now, the obvious are the manifest functions. Manifest functions are easy. There's two that stand out. One, it's to provide a job. Prostitution provides a job for the prostitute. And two, second manifest function is that prostitution provides sexual services for those who are seeking sexual services. So if we stopped right there, we'd say, yeah, purpose of prostitution in society, it provides jobs and it provides sexual services to those men who might seek it. But when we look at the latent functions of prostitution, we're going to discover that prostitution meets many other needs within society. And in meeting these needs, it's probably going to have a lot to do with why prostitution continues to exist no matter what society does to try to eliminate it. So let's talk about these other needs or other groups that benefit. For instance, here is a latent function of prostitution. And remember now, latent function is the unobvious, unintended, unrecognized function of a social activity. Here's a group, the police. Do the police benefit from prostitution? Yeah. Why? Because the police need somebody to arrest. Very often within police departments, certain segments of the department is assigned to investigate prostitution as a crime. They used to call it the vice squad. And the vice squad needs vice. It needs prostitution. In other words, how can the police have a job investigating prostitutes unless there are prostitutes to investigate and to arrest? So here's one group that benefits, the police. And then once the prostitute gets arrested, the court system benefits. She pays court fees. So the courts benefit, the bail bondsman benefits. The public defender who defends the prostitute has a job doing that. The probation officer gets somebody to watch and make sure that they behave. So we have all these groups here who benefit. Other groups that might benefit are maybe bars or hotels. If the prostitute hangs out at a certain bar and therefore customers come in and buy drinks to try to meet a prostitute, the bar benefits from that. If the prostitute takes the customer to a certain hotel, the hotel is going to have a room that they rent. They're going to benefit. True. I had a guy in my class that was a taxi driver, and you know what? He said, hey, he took men on the weekends to places where they might meet a prostitute. They gave him a tip. He said he benefited. Do sociologists benefit? Yeah. It gives us somebody to research, somebody to talk about. Many studies have been done in sociology on prostitutes, about their lives, about why they became a prostitute, about how they feel about themselves. In fact, when we get to the symbolic interactions theory, we're going to talk about that somewhat. So sociologists benefit. You could even say, to some degree, preachers benefit. How do preachers benefit? And again, not as customers, but as people who, like the police, have somebody to save. The police need somebody to arrest, right? The preachers need somebody to save. And in fact, I had a couple in my class years ago who said, they stood up and said that they were here as missionaries in El Paso and they worked in certain sections of the town, and that they claimed that, you know, when you saved a whore, a prostitute, and they said this right in class, you've done God's work because you saved the lowliest. So prostitution gives us, for some of the people involved in religion, an example of sin and an example of somebody who needs to be saved, salvation. So in that way, you could say religion benefits from prostitution. But actually, when we look closer at prostitution, we find some other latent functions that actually are much more interesting. And it has to do with the provision of sexual services. If I brought into class a prostitute, say from here in El Paso, and I said, look, who makes up the largest single group of men who use your services? In most cases, she would probably say the military. Now, why would she say the military? Because the military fall into a group that we're going to call transients. Because a lot of these guys that are here may be here for basic training or how to learn how to shoot a missile or drive a tank or something like that. They're going to be here 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. They don't have time to go out and find a girlfriend and start a relationship. They're away from their wives or their girlfriends. And these men may be young men who very often still want to go out and meet females and maybe have sexual needs. And so therefore, the prostitutes meeting the needs of his group of men called transients. Transients are people who travel a lot, who are away from home a lot. Another example of transients would be truck drivers. A friend of mine drives a long-haul truck, and he tells me that in the long-haul truck driving business, there's a lot of prostitution. In fact, they have a term, not a very flattering term, called lot lizards. They refer to prostitutes as lot lizards because apparently they frequent or hang around lots where these truck stops, trucks pull in, and they try to get customers. Now again, guys who drive long-haul trucks, they're transients, they're away from home, they're away from their wives, their girlfriends. A friend of mine that drives a truck says he's away from home 13 out of 14 days. Wow. Another group is a group that maybe of men who has a fetish. I used to ask in class this question. I used to say, how many guys in here like to be tied up and spanked before they have sex? So you guys out there, think about that. Now, a guy, if you like to be tied up and spanked before you have sex, might you be nervous that your girlfriend's going to say, oh my gosh, he's a little too strange for me. I don't want to keep him as a boyfriend. But what if you really like it, you know? And if your girlfriend or wife doesn't want to meet your needs, who might meet your needs? A prostitute. We know from our research on prostitution that prostitutes very often claim that their best customers are these men who we would call kinky, who have these fetishes. And that very often these guys come back and they become repeat customers because their wives or girlfriends will not meet their sexual needs. And in fact, I met a woman years ago in Florida who told me a funny story that she used to fly down to the Bahamas and was a prostitute at the casinos on the weekend. And she said her strangest customer, and she asked me what I thought about it. I remember years ago when I was in college, was a guy who would take her to his room, and she was a regular customer, and they would take their clothes off and they'd sit on the floor and spread their legs, so like apart from each other at opposite ends of the room. And what he would do, this is a fetish, I've never heard of it, he'd take a beach ball and he'd roll it from between his legs to between her legs. And when it hit between her legs, she had to go, ooh, ooh, ooh. And then, that's right. And when she rolled it back, she had to try to get it to hit between his legs, and he'd go, ooh, ooh, ooh. And he paid her good money for doing this. And she told me this. I go, what the heck? Sounds like bowling to me. But it was a fetish. Now, I'm sure ladies out there, if your boyfriend said, hey, I want you to get undressed and roll a beach ball between my legs, and we each go, ooh, ooh, ooh. Some of you women out there might say no. But if that man had that fetish, he would go to a prostitute, because this prostitute that was telling me the story was very curious. He wanted my sociological analysis of how it got started, and that's a whole other story. So we're always going to have men with fetishes. And finally, you're going to have men out there who are appearance challenged. So what do I mean by appearance challenged? You're basically going to have guys that feel they don't look attractive enough. They're not suave enough. They're not whatever it is enough to attract a female. I once met this guy who used to go to prostitutes over in Juarez, and I asked him, I said, why don't you, find a girlfriend here in El Paso? And why do you go, across the border in order to seek out a prostitute? I asked him why he did that. And he said, short, fat, and ugly, and no woman here would have me. And I thought it was kind of sad, because what he was saying was that I don't have the confidence in myself in order to be able to find a female that would become my girlfriend, whom I could have sex with. Now, what we're trying to say here in these latent functions about the types or the groups of men that are served by prostitutes is that, are we always going to have men who are transients? Yes, you're always going to have men, military, truck drivers, businessmen, etc. Are we always going to have men out there who have fetishes? Yes. So therefore, always going to have prostitutes. And finally, are you always going to have men who feel appearance challenged? Yes. So in looking at the latent functions of prostitution, we can see why prostitution will continue to exist. Many different professions and occupations, the police and the preachers and the sociologists and the bars and the hotels, make money directly, indirectly on prostitution. And prostitution meets the needs of groups of men, in particular transients, and in particular men who are appearance challenged, and in particular men have fetishes, and these groups will always be around. Now, one interesting fact of this discussion that you might have noticed, and maybe you didn't, is the bias, because this whole discussion was biased in terms of how prostitution meets the needs of men. Notice I did not say transients in respect to women, but there are women transients. I did not say fetishes in respect to women, but yes, women do have fetishes. And I did not say appearance challenge in respect to women, but yes, there are women who lack confidence in their appearance. So the question arises is why don't we have a lot of men out there meeting the sexual needs of women? And the functionalist theory is not very good at explaining this. But later on in this unit, when we get to the conflict theory, the conflict theorists will say, yeah, let me tell you why we don't have a lot of male prostitutes out there meeting the needs of women.